I actually ended up taking the CCNA twice. Second time I got it the same week of graduation. So I left out of there with a CCNA certification. And back then, I'm not sure if you remember, they gave you this little thing, look like a license that showed your certification also. And I remember I took that thing everywhere, man. I would be in the clubs with it. Like I meet somebody, say, "Yeah, I'm a certified CCNA."
Hello and welcome to the Cisco Learning Network podcast. That's Michael Bowden, a Cisco Networking Academy support specialist and creator of the Debt Free in IT podcast, which is both an audio and video podcast with the goal of motivating anyone who's in the IT industry. Debt Free in IT features Michael's journey of studying and preparing for Cisco certifications, as well as conversations touching on topics that others have had about the IT industry, such as transitioning into tech later in one's career. In this episode, Michael talks with Cisco Learning Network Community Manager Matt Saunders about how he got started in his networking career, how Cisco certifications have helped him along his career journey, and why he started debt-free in IT in the first place.
So one of the things I like to do, Michael, when we talk to folks is I'm always curious about what brought people into this world of networking, network engineering, IT. Because for myself, when I was working in the field, I did not have a straight path into the field of networking and IT. It was definitely a bit of an roundabout, accidental, happy accident, surprise kind of a situation. I'm just curious about, for yourself too, like tell us a little bit about your background. Like, did you know from day one, high school years, that you wanted to be a network engineer, or what did that evolution look like for you?
For me, coming up younger, one thing I noticed quickly was that a lot of technical type things I was able to pick up on pretty quick. And back then, it was mostly with electronics. It was mostly tinkering with electronics, taking them apart, putting them together. I give some credit to my pops, my father. He's always been into tech, like tech gadgets and things like that. So that kind of stemmed my interest. And then from there, my first time really seeing like IT type deals was when my sister bought the first PC. This back in the days of dial up. And we had our first PC. The CD drive went bad. And, we called support and they sent a rep. And the guy came to fix the CD drive. And I'm curious. So I'm watching him do everything. And I'm looking at him like, oh, you just took the CD drive out and put a new one in? Almost like a car, take a part off, you put the part back in. So that was my first time seeing it. So that made me see, okay, this may be something that deals with a job or something. Because I asked him plenty of questions, and he was a service rep, so he was from another town, a couple of hours away. He drove there. He was like, "Yeah, they sent me out here to change your CD drive." So that was probably my very first time of seeing it.
Let me ask you a quick, where was that at? Because you're in North Carolina currently these days?
Yes.
Oh, so was that also in North Carolina?
Yes. So born and raised, small town, Mount Gilead, North Carolina. One of the smaller towns where I think we have probably about 2 or 3 traffic lights, and then you're going out of town to the next town. So I was there, born and raised. That's where I'm currently still at in my hometown. So he was sent from a local town close by, and that was the first time like I seen someone actually have a job that's dealing with tech.
That's exactly what I was wondering. And I was also curious, I kind of cut you off a little bit because we were going to keep going, but one of the things I was curious about is as you got that exposure and you had that level of interest, for myself at that time, in the world, there weren't a lot of computer classes. There were some computer classes at my school level, mostly like some basics of programming.
Uh-huh.
Were you in high school at that age? So junior high school, whatever?
Yes. So I was roughly probably about 10th, 11th grade, I think.
Okay, yeah.
And back then we had a class that, everybody just called it a computer class because it had computers in there.
Right.
Most of the time, I don't remember probably maybe having some keyboarding classes. That was the big thing back then. Everybody needs to be able to type so many words per minute. Other than that, not really nothing that really digs into it. Like even early on, the best thing I remember out of those computer classes back then was, and this may be telling my age, but I remember one class we would go to because we could play the game Oregon Trail.
For those of you who aren't old enough to know this game, the Oregon Trail was, or should I say is because it's still available, an educational strategy game that simulates the hardships of the Oregon Trail, teaching players about history, geography, and decision making. It was in a lot of grade schools throughout the 90s.
I'm not sure if anyone remembers that older video game. So we would play that on the computer, Oregon Trail. But other than that, it wasn't nothing that showed you the different categories and different paths into the IT industry.
Right, exactly. Yep, same experience. My stepfather was probably my big influence in terms of learning some technical skills. He was a network administrator for the New York City Board of Ed.
Okay.
And so he always had everything around the house as well, and computer parts and equipment and gear and everything around the house. So same thing, same kind of situation. And it was interesting for me too, because as a child, I was rebelling against my stepfather. I don't hear anything he had to say about anything, certainly not computers. And so, fast forward 10 years or so later, and I was working in IT full time just like him. And I always thought that was a little ironic, and would always laugh to myself about that.
Oh yeah, that's usually how I end up going. That's usually how it goes.
Exactly. So I'm so sorry. And then what you were going to keep sharing, kind of what led to the next thing after that early discovery.
Yes. After that, I think the next thing was I started working at this, I call it a plant manufacturing place where we made car carpet. So that was now I've done graduated from high school. So that's where I'm working. Wasn't really interested in going to college back then. So my thing was back then, everyone just told you go to school, graduate, go get a job local in a factory somewhere and you stay there till you retire. So that's what I did. I said, okay, I'm going up here to this place. We making car carpet. I was there for years. And what ended up happening, sometimes you have a bad situation happen, and then when you make it out of it, you look back, you like, oh, if that situation wouldn't have happened, I might not be where I am now. So back then, you get comfortable working that job, you get in your routine, and one day we came in and we was told that job would be shutting down and then it would be moving overseas. So that probably was a pivotal point in my career. That was a real pivotal point.
Man, that resonates so powerfully. Talk about that just for another moment there about exactly what you said. I just want to emphasize what you said there about sometimes a negative experience will happen and it feels like the end of so many things, right? And you kind of can sink a little bit, if you let it get to you. But you're right, like so many times, if we are able to kind of see a path forward or find a path forward, you stumble into a path forward, it actually become like one of the best things that ever happened to you.
Oh yeah, that's totally what happened. I remember I worked third shift at the time, so I remember getting off that morning and they called all of us into the little meeting area and they told us about the job shutting down in like a month or two. Counter that from something negative, thinking that, oh, I got bills to pay. So how am I going to continue this? So for taking something negative and the opportunity was kind of presented by that company. They told us that, okay, since we're shutting down and moving overseas, if you sign up to go to school at a community college some close by, we would pay your 2 years for you to go to school. And that way you can have the skills to go out and get another job. So that opportunity was like, okay, well, I knew around that time I didn't like working in the plant, driving third shift, things like that. So I was like, okay, I ain't have nothing to lose. It's basically free, so that what led me to go and search for the community college route there. So that opportunity that started out bad, it ended up being one of the most pivotal points of my career.
That makes perfect sense. That I see that happen so often. That happened for me as well. I mean, honestly, what the experience that led to my current role here as community manager for the Cisco Learning Network was honestly the exact same kind of a situation. They were consolidating IT operations from all the satellite. I was working for an education company at the time, all the satellite campus locations to the central office headquarters. So they were reducing all the staff. Same thing. led to this opportunity. So I'm really glad you mentioned that particular part. And so that was a networking academy program that you discovered there, one of the Cisco networking academy programs.
Yeah, so what's funny is actually the place I'm employed at now, but back then it was between like 2 or 3 community colleges. So I didn't really know what I wanted to go for, didn't really know what I wanted to major in, but I did know that my brother-in-law was into the IT industry. At the time, he was a programmer, so I knew what he did, and from the looks of it, I was like, well, seem like they're doing pretty good for themselves. So that would led me to, okay, now I need to search for who got IT programs around or nearby. And that's why I found the community college that I ended up going to. So it was a little bit of, oftentimes you think back and there's many people and things that play a role into how you end up. So that was me meeting him, my brother-in-law. That was another big proponent that made me see that you can actually make a living doing this thing in tech or IT.
Yeah, that's perfect. And when you got started at first, how was that? Was it daunting a little bit? You know what I mean? How did you feel about that, digging into that?
Coming from the high school standpoint, and I think that's probably something a lot of people go when they're transitioning from a high school student to a college student is, in my mind, I'm thinking that, okay, the instructor's gonna be on me heavy all the time, things like that. I'm thinking back to the high school rules, so I'm thinking back to that. So that was a little daunting. But then actually, even before I started my first day, what ended up happening again was the only thing in IT I knew at the time was programming, because that's what my brother-in-law did. So the state of North Carolina, the program I was in, you had to go for something that they deemed you could get a job in after you graduate in North Carolina. So I went for programming. Just so happened this was around the time the video game scene started picking up. So instead of calling the program programming, it was called game simulation and design. So the state of North Carolina at the time, we only had like one place in North Carolina that did anything with video games. But with most of those programs, the back end is still programming, but they wouldn't approve me to take that.
So the state of North Carolina wouldn't approve Michael to take a programming course, and he was about to take a class called game simulation instead, which wasn't exactly what he was looking for. But at the last possible moment, the last day Michael had to give an answer about what curriculum he wanted to pursue, he ran into the networking instructor at the community college, and then something happened.
On my way out, I ran into the networking instructor. He was in his networking classroom. I don't know how he was there because it was late and he must have been there like straightening up the classroom or something. So he stopped me when I was walking by, and I told him my situation, and he was like, well, you want to learn how to configure these? And he was pointing to some, I think at the time, 1900 switches. I mean, they were probably the bit routers, the bit boys. They were them heavy ones. So he was pointing to that. And, for me, that was overwhelming. I'm like, man, I can't do that. He was like, you know how to burn a CD? I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, you can learn how to configure these. So I was like, well, okay.
Michael told the state of North Carolina,
Hey, I'm going for networking. And they approved it. And that's how I ended up a student at that community college there, going for networking and security was the actual program.
I'd love to hear that background and the catalyst into it. Thank you for sharing that with all of us. I was going to say just with me, but with everyone who listens to this episode as well. And then after that, after you finished the program, you got into the field, but then eventually currently you're working as an instructor with Networking Academy as well at the same college location?
Yeah, so I like to say that my career paths have made full circle. So I started out, like I said, I was at that community college. My networking instructor, he was real good. Like I said, I work for him now. So he made a way for me to get certified upon graduation. So I actually ended up taking the CCNA twice. Second time I got it the same week of graduation. So I left out of there with a CCNA certification. And back then, I'm not sure if you remember, they gave you this little thing, look like a license that showed your certification also. And I remember I took that thing everywhere, man. I would be in the clubs with it. Like I meet somebody, say, "Yeah, I'm a certified CCNA." From that point, my first job was straight out of graduation. It was at a call center. Needless to say, I didn't stay at the call center too long, but eventually what happened was after the call center, it took me roughly about another 2.5, close to 3 years. And that's when I got in at a healthcare organization where I did a lot of my years at. And from that healthcare organization, I did a couple of different jobs there in IT. The hardest thing was once I got back to networking in the networking department, one of the hardest things there was just, learning the environment, things like that. Handling different projects and everything like that. But also from the viewpoint of me getting into like my first real IT job at that healthcare organization, one of the things I think that was a big struggle for me at the time was I didn't realize the hierarchy of jobs. Like, you get a CCNA and you think that, okay, I got a CCNA, I ain't had no experience, but I'm applying for network engineer roles. I'm applying for senior engineer roles. After I got in at the organization and started looking at the hierarchy, then it started clicking for me and like, oh, I should have been applying for network technician roles or network admin roles and things like that to try to get in. And then if I didn't land something there, it then go down to like a help desk or desktop to try to get my foot in the door. So that was probably two of the kind of hardest points for me was just getting the initial start, getting in. And then once I got back to networking, it was just being able to learn that network and then put everything together from the stuff you've been reading for your certifications and things to seeing the pieces start coming together. So eventually, after a couple months in that role, things started clicking where I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense now. That's why in the lab I was doing this. Okay, this is how I take it, what I learned from the lab and put it into the real world. So I think just overcoming that was some of the biggest low points when getting back into the industry.
Perfect. How I got connected with you is through the platform that you're building now, podcast platform and social media channels for the Debt Free in IT podcast and social media accounts. And I'm really curious about that. And, why the title? First of all, the name of it. You know what I mean? Like, why is that important to you, that title?
Yeah, so the title, like I just started posting on here the last couple years, but I actually had the title and everything probably about 2018 around that time. And, after being in the industry and, going through different positions at that organization, I went from ops to desktop. I went to help desk. I did that. Then I ended up my last couple of years back in networking. So along that time, I noticed like, how you get in a position, you start to make more income. And eventually, when you first get in that position with that extra income, you're like, okay, I can breathe. Eventually, within a year, you may be back in that same position where you're like, okay, I need another raise. I need to generate some more income. So noticing that path, I started going down the path of debt free. Started listening to a lot of Dave Ramsey, a lot of financial videos.
Dave Ramsey is an American personal finance expert and author who shares financial advice through books and podcasts. His principles focus on debt-free living, budgeting, and wealth building using methods like the baby steps and the debt snowball. His best-known books include The Total Money Makeover and Financial Peace.
When I wanted to learn networking, I knew that, okay, I can go do these labs, I can lab up, I can put time into it, get discipline, things like that. But, I never had done that with my finances. So now I want to buckle down, go through, particularly I like the baby steps.
The principle behind Dave Ramsey's baby steps that Michael just mentioned is to learn in 7 steps how to save for emergencies, pay off all of your debt for good, and purportedly build wealth.
Some people don't like it, but I like the baby steps. But I want to go through that and just kind of show people, sometimes it ain't about making the high amounts of money. Sometimes it's about fixing how you use that money in the first place, sometimes to kind of live below your means and things like that.
And that's how Debt Free in IT was born.
Because I was interested in finance, becoming debt free, but also my main job and everything was in the IT.
And it's interesting too, because I think it's applicable in another way as well. When you think about, the financial burden and the overhead costs of a full college experience, a full 4-year, university college experience versus kind of the skill building route into IT, and how there's another way where you can manage your overhead and your costs leading into building up your career in IT as well. So I find that kind of also interesting in that regard too.
Yeah, like I said, it's being able to just manage everything. Like in the IT, it's a known fact. Most people, as you climb up that ladder, you start to make pretty decent income. So it's just being able to manage that income to where you don't end up, drowning almost, where your head is just above water.
Right. That's one of the things that I love about certification paths in IT in general. Of course, we'll talk specifically Cisco certification paths, but there's of course other options as well. But through the Cisco certification programs, your ability to manage your overhead from a cost factor to get into those well-paying jobs and build a good paying career. There's costs involved along the way, of course, absolutely, but typically it's much more manageable than incurring $100,000, $200,000 of debt with student loan route. So that's one of the things that I always try to help people understand is the great career you can build with the overhead, the cost factor on the front end of it being a little more manageable.
Yeah, I think right now the CCNA certification is roughly 340, 350, somewhere around there.
Michael's close here, but the Cisco Certified Network Associate or CCNA certification exam currently costs $300 to schedule.
If you think about it, like if you can self study or maybe at the least maybe a community college that's something not too high, but it's possible to self study. But you look at that investment, 340 or $50, and you pass this, and once you get into the door and make it to networking, it's almost 100 times what the investment was. So I think the certifications has been a game changer. Like I said, I just started learning about them when I was a student, but now there are more certifications out there. And like I said, Cisco has been my route for a long time. Like most of my certs and cert tests I've taken has been Cisco certification. So just looking at it, the CCNA that I got a couple years ago, which I've gotten it again, that built my whole career. If you think about it, that's what got me in the door. That's what got me able to move up back to a networking role. That's what led to me being a Cisco instructor for a community college. So you look at that return on investment, and only other way you can beat that probably if you got in Apple when they first came out a couple years ago. So
Right. That's exactly. With your role as an academy instructor, and then how you're using your platform through your podcasts and your social accounts, I'm real curious about some of your goals with the platform and how it might relate to your instructing experience and working with students. And I'm curious, what are some of the things that you see students struggling with through your academy program, and how are you taking those learnings, that insight of what you learn about the students and their struggles, and relating that to the podcast and your content production, if you are?
yes, so a lot of times you see where students or anyone just getting into the field or trying to get into or learn about it, one of the biggest things probably is confidence, trying to build that confidence. So I'm one of the people, like, I like to be realistic. So even in my platform and everything, I try to tell you everything that I know. Most people ain't gonna tell you that, oh, when I started in operations, I was scared to move up because it was so overwhelming. Like I slowed myself up when like now, I try to tell everyone, my students too, once you get into the field, once you get your foot in the door and that organization finds out that, oh, you're a good person to work with and things like that, like a lot of times you may be able to move up a little faster than usual, just because you're a good person to work with. And then also you got that skill set. So with my podcast, I try to be the platform that if those for the people that ask, how do I get into IT? What's the best route to get in IT? So I take that question, and that's where I get most of my majority of my topics and episodes from. I always ask myself if someone was asking me, because that's what I would get asked a lot from my relatives, from friends. So I would say, okay, if someone asks me how to get in IT, 9 times out of 10, they may think IT is one thing. Some people they think that, okay, you're in IT, that means you know how to code, that means you know networking, that means you know AI, when that's not really the case. So I take that one question of how do I get in IT, and I show them or try to show them every possible route. I take it, I break it down to every possible route, whether that's networking, security, coding. I try to give them every possible route. So I try to be the billboard for that question. If someone say, how do I get in IT? I want you to come to my channel. Hopefully you find something that said, oh, okay, I didn't know all of this existed. So now I know I got different pathways to go and try to see which one that better suits me.
Yeah, that's exactly what I imagine. And I see you doing really well on that channel is exactly that. Like, I've really enjoyed watching your videos and how you relate and convey the information so clearly for folks to be able to consume and digest and understand and believe in what the work that you're doing there. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to invite you on to our podcast to help, amplify your podcast channel so that people can kind of connect and maybe share people in their life that they see an opportunity to take advantage of these networking paths, the full IT paths. But, for us, particularly, of course, the networking paths for building up their own careers as well. That's a big thing I believe in about, I believe in each one, teach one kind of a mentality. So the idea of you helping to share and convey that knowledge and information to others, kind of the idea of paying it forward. And I really respect and admire that.
I appreciate it. Like I said, a lot of times, the first thing I would recommend people to do is always learn some networking. That's probably the one thing I recommend to everyone is even if they say, okay, I don't want to be a network administrator, I don't want to go get a CCNA. If you look at everything else in tech, if you're building a house, you got to have that strong foundation in order for that house to stay up. So you look at networking, to me in IT, networking is that house foundation. Once you understand networking, then you're able to build on it or build your house with any other category you choose. You're able to go to cybersecurity because you understand how that networking works. You can't protect a network if you don't understand how it works. So you know how it works. You can pivot to maybe a server team. All of it involves networking. Like even when I was at the help desk, I probably used more networking than anything because a lot of times you get PCs or calls where the PC might be on the wrong network or somebody might have put a statically assigned address in that PC. So I often recommend everyone to learn some networking, even if you may not be going down a network administrator path, but it's good to know. And then it makes everything else a little bit easier because when you get to something else and it started referencing networking, you understand what it's referencing now.
Yep. Amen. I would not add a single thing other than to endorse and co-sign exactly that. What are some of the things that excite you the most? What are some of the things that get you the most excited about the industry and kind of where the industry is going, where networking is going, where cybersecurity is going? What are some of the things that fires you up?
I think some of the things now with networking and with everything, you're starting to see more programming become involved, where before traditional networking, mainly command line, and then now, years later, you got some programmability in there. You got some SD-WAN. And I remember when the DevNet certification first came out, man, it's still on my Mount Rushmore. That's still a cert I plan to conquer. But when DevNet came out and I started reading through the topics and everything, I'm like, in my mind, I'm saying, oh, it's like a network administrator and a programmer had a baby. So it's interesting to see how far things have come from when I was a student up until now. It's almost like back in the days when you used to think of something like, oh, in the future it's going to be like this. That's something that even back then you would think, okay, how's this going to be 20 years from now? So, and with tech, as you know, it changes fast. So it ain't even a time point how fast it changes. But I think it's going an interesting route. Then I'm also interested to see how AI gets incorporated with a lot of things. I think it'll help a lot of people out within their day-to-day jobs and things like that. So I'm interested to see how all of that pans out.
I totally agree. And it's so interesting. I love to hear that you're excited about the programming and the automation side of things because it's nice to see the paradigm shift a bit 5, 6, 7 years ago when we were trying to advocate for network engineers to learn programming skills. And up until the last couple of years, right, we'd always get a lot of hesitation around that. I'm not a programmer. I got into networking because I didn't want to become a programmer. I don't want to learn, right? Now we're seeing more and more people are embracing it. They're understanding the value of it in their day-to-day jobs, in their job roles, and the power that it helps them to unlock to become better engineers.
Yes, so it's definitely a plus. Like I said, I'm not a programmer myself. And that's probably one of the reasons I got in networking at the time was like, oh, okay, I'm not a programmer. Or I couldn't go for programming. So let me go into networking. But like I said, the programming, and we had a head start years ago. We knew it was coming. But I think now it's at that point where you have to know a little bit of programming. And I would say mostly a lot of Python. I see Python is being used everywhere. So that's one skill set that'll be real good for someone to have in their repertoire.
Michael's not wrong here. In fact, Stack Overflow's developer survey results from 2021 had Python as the fourth most popular language according to professional developers. According to the TIOB Index, or the Importance of Being Earnest Index, as of October 2022, Python overtook Java and C as the most popular language.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's essentially essential
Oh yeah.
now, yep, moving forward and everything. And like you mentioned, of course, all the new AI job skills that are being incorporated and being introduced as well. And I think partly the theme that we're really touching on here, the larger theme than the specific technologies, just the opportunity to learn new things.
Yes.
Otherwise, I imagine that we'll get stale
Yep.
and we'll get bored with our careers as well if we're not challenging ourselves to learn new things and to grow. So I love that.
That's one thing about tech. You got to stay learning. You're always a learner. So things will change. So I think that's real good with keeping you on your feet and everything too.
Yep. So then, not to be too cliche about my transition to this next point here, but speaking of learning, if folks want to learn more about you and your channels, how can they find you if they want to add you to their subscription list?
So I'm on YouTube under Debt Free in IT with Mike. So that's Debt Free in IT, all one word, and space with just a W / then space Mike.
And we'll drop a link in the description of this episode for you to access as well.
And then also you can find me on all social media platforms. So YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all of that is under Debt Free in IT. And then always I got a website. You can go to Debt Free in IT with Mike and you can see pretty much everything there. Then also, I have a newsletter that I'm gearing up to get ready to start sending out. So I try to cover a lot of platforms as one person. It's been fun, and like I said, it's the learning process for me. So just learning, try to get better every week, things like that. But on there, like I said, you want to reach out, please feel free. I love answering questions and things like that. And like I said, I'll be looking forward to it.
Thank you for sitting down with me, Mike, and spending some time with me and sharing your story and your background. I hope others find you and connect with you further on your channel as well. You share a lot of just really great information on a regular basis. I definitely recommend folks getting connected with you and starting to follow and listen to the information that you're publishing on such a regular basis.
Appreciate it. I appreciate it. Like I said, I'm there waiting.
That's it for our episode with Michael, creator of the Debt Free and IT podcast. To subscribe to Michael's channel, please visit the link in the description of this episode. To find training videos, study guides, and an entire community of learners who can help you in your learning journey, please visit the Cisco Learning Network at learningnetwork.cisco.com. Finally, please subscribe to the Cisco Learning Network podcast as well, so you can continue to hear more news about the changing world of Cisco certifications and to hear stories of others on their certification journeys. Thanks for listening.